Curious Lloyd.
Have you ever heard the phrase, you eat with your eyes? On top of it being a good horror movie premise, it turns out it's actually true. We tend to orient our diets on how food looks, instead of how it actually tastes, and the food industry knows this. We are denied multiple carrot varieties because of the Dutch. Carrots come in a rainbow of colours, each with their own variety of flavours, textures and nutrients. White carrots are crispier, red carrots are starchier, and purple carrots have a hint of spice to them. There's so much variety that a talented chef could probably make a decent meal out of just carrots. So why is it that orange carrots have become the worldwide standard, to the point where everything else looks like some toxic mutation? Bizarrely enough, whenever you bite into an orange carrot, you're chewing on a hearty mouthful of Dutch patriotism. Back in the 17th century, the Netherlands broke away from the Spanish political influence to become a nation of its own right. The main driving force behind this was the Dutch royal family. The dynasty was so absurdly popular that the colour orange essentially became a trademark of the Dutch, as it remains to this day, all because it happened to be the surname of a bunch of aristocrats the people really liked. The Dutch people started wearing orange, painting their houses orange, and planting trees that flowered orange, in what was possibly the most successful political branding campaign of all time. And of course, orange food also became incredibly popular. The most obvious winners were oranges, but orange sweets, jams, and alcohol also cornered the market. It is for this reason that orange carrots vastly outsold every other variety. The success of the Dutch international trade meant that the orange carrot craze eventually infected the rest of the world, and now, most people would regard a white carrot as some sort of albino. Tomatoes and apples sacrifice taste for vibrant colour. Tomatoes are an inoffensive filler vegetable. You might put a couple of slices on your burger or mix it into a pasta sauce with enough sugar and herbs to make it edible. But you'd call someone a freak if you saw them take a bite out of a tomato like they mistook it for an apple. Although, I kind of do eat tomatoes like apples. But tomatoes used to taste quite good. Once upon a time, around 70 years ago, the common tomato was sweeter, more aromatic, and generally more flavourful. So what happened? Put it simply, farmers noticed that tomatoes sold better the redder they were, because buyers figured that meant they were ripe. So farmers began to deliberately breed tomatoes to be uniform red. Of course, most tomato buyers aren't biologists, so they didn't know that the gene that's responsible for holding back the redness of a ripened tomato is also the one that gives it the flavour. If you remember the basics of school biology, you know that the green part of the plants contain the chloroplasts, which turn sunlight into sugars. Deprive a tomato of those, and you'll end up with a balloon full of bland pulp that we have today. The exact same thing happened to the apple industry, although it's the most popular apple variety in the United States was the Red Delicious, which you could say is half a lie, but is now a mushy, grainy, large, wet styrofoam. May have lived up to its title when it hit the market back in the late 1800s. But farmers dedicated the following years to maximising the redness at the expense of the deliciousness. Over the generations, Red Delicious apples have been bred not only to increase their uniform colour and size, but also to give them a thicker skin to hide bruises and therefore maximise shelf life. But the name sucks, because red is alright, I guess. Oranges need special treatment to become orange enough. Oranges are not orange. I know what you're thinking, whether the colour was named after the fruit or vice versa. The fact remains that oranges are the most appropriately named member of the fruit family. But here's the downfall. When picked from the tree, most oranges look something like this. Those oranges are perfectly ripe, and yellowy green is in fact the way real oranges roll in nature, just like the aforementioned tomatoes and apples. That doesn't change the fact that we are so accustomed to oranges living up to the names, and so we tend to bypass any that aren't as orange as possible. So how do oranges get their customary unnatural hue? Virtually, all the oranges you buy from the supermarket have gone through a de-greening process, which means they have been bathed in ethylene gas. This bleaches the patchy yellow and the green out of the skin of the fruit so that the bright orange innards can shine through. An unfortunate side effect of this treatment is that it reduces the fruit's shelf life. The reasoning fruit goes from green to yellow, or orange in nature in the first place, is that it's basically dying. Ethylene works because it's an organic compound that simulates the rotting process to kill that disgusting healthy green crap and turn your orange into something delectable corpse. So there you go, oranges aren't orange, and also, your life is just a lie, a giant lie. Artificial colours dictate our food choices. You're an independent thinker, You are not one of those sheeple who consume whatever corporate countries tells you to consume. You only eat what tastes good to you, not what the person tells you to slide down your mouth. I know this. I'm merely saying that what tastes good to you probably has a lot to do with how pretty your food is, and the food corporations know it, so you'd better believe they know it. In a study done by the Cornell University, researchers offered participants bowls of Cheetos without their signature artificial orange colouring. Nothing was changed except the absence of the tasteless orange dye, revealing the true nature of Cheetos as mostly colourless corn husks, but participants nevertheless reported them to be bland and unappetizing. It turns out that your brilliant meat brain still bases much of its pleasure response on how visibly attractive your food is. And it's taken a little while for corporations to fully understand this. In the early 1990s, Pepsi released Crystal Pepsi, which tasted the same as regular Coke, but was colourless, going on the idea that customers would correlate clear with purity. The product crashed because everyone thought it was nothing but a sugary saliva, but at the moment, there is an ongoing petition to bring it back. In 2014, Burger King released a burger in Japan that had its bun and cheese dyed in jet black for some reason. Because there's a precedent for this there. Squid ink is also used as a dye in some dishes. Meanwhile, Americans and many other countries reacted to the images with abject horror, declaring that the burgers looked like cancer lung postmortems. We throw out perfectly good food because our standards are insane. As it turns out, the rows of perfectly shaped, uniformly coloured, virtual identical fruits and vegetables you find neatly laid out in the produce section of your supermarket aren't exactly indicative of the natural order. Nature couldn't care what fruit looks like anyway, and so much of the annual harvest from your local farm looks like a vegetable freak show of bent cucumbers, prolapsed oranges, and Siamese twin carrots. So, why don't you see these mutants in your supermarket? Because the supermarket thinks that you won't go anywhere near them. Because of this, somewhere between 5 and 30% of each harvest in the world goes directly into the compost bin before it even hits the shelves. Even though it tastes exactly the same like a normal apple, nobody's going to sell one that looks like the Hulk's testicles, for example. There has been rigorous government standards regulating the shape and colour of produce in Europe since the 80s. For example, the EU law governing cucumbers states that they have to be bent by a gradient of no more than 1/10 of an inch, and bananas must be free from abnormal curvature and at least 14 centimeters in length. It wasn't enough for us to give young women a complex with our unrealistic standards of beauty, so we had to go and do it with our food too. Modern agricultural methods make our food more vulnerable to disease. People want a banana that looks, smells, and above all, tastes exactly the same as the last banana. Unfortunately, nature itself actively fights against this through a process called evolution. Evolution keeps trying to turn fish into monkeys, dinosaurs into birds, and bananas into I don't know what. But long ago, human agriculture found a way to fight back against natural variation. We don't grow fruit or nuts from tree seeds anymore. We clone them. We cut off the branches of existing trees and then replant them, creating a new tree that is genetically identical to the old one, and thus eliminate the chances of producing fruit that is even slightly different in any way. In a way, every apple, apricot, or chestnut tree is kind of the same tree. Imagine if every steak you ever had came from the same gigantic immortal cow. When I say it in that way, it almost makes it seem weird. The big problem with this is that nature relies on genetic diversity for a good reason. That diversity is the only thing that stands in the way of disease. If every organism is a clone, all it takes is one bad cold to kill everything. That's not a hypothetical. It's already happening to bananas, or rather, it's already happened. Bananas are possibly the most inbred fruit on earth, due to the fact they don't even have seeds anymore. So by design, every banana you've ever eaten has essentially been the same banana. A cultivator known as the Cavendish, but there used to be another variety. In the early 1900s, the most popular banana was the Gros Michel, and it reportedly had a bolder, creamier taste. One year, the Gros Michel came down with a fungus called Panama disease, which almost instantaneously wiped out the entire cultivar. Luckily, we had the Cavendish to fall back on, because the slightest genetic difference from the Gros Michel was enough to save it, for now. It's only a matter of time before the Panama disease comes for the rest of our bananas, as many Cavendish plantations are currently battling against the resurgence, and bananas are just the first of the victims. Other fruits, such as apples, are also approaching that genetic bottleneck, at which point one opportunistic disease could excavate an entire layout of our food pyramid. But all of that is worthwhile, so long as we never have to try anything new. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and I will catch you again next week.
Ba 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 banana.